I was camping with my girlfriend at Joshua Tree National Park in California. We were on a journey from Texas to San Diego and back, so we had all our camping gear with us. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up with the need to use the restroom. The campsite does not have running water or restrooms, but there is an outhouse located near the entrance of the campground area. The site itself is quite small, perhaps only room for 6 cars at most. There are also tent sites. There were 2 other groups camping that night as well. So I got out of my car and walked over to the bathroom. As soon as I stepped outside, it was eerily silent, except for one noise. What sounded like a goat bleating very loudly and angrily off in the distance. Now let me tell you something about Joshua Tree National Park. It's extremely remote. Seriously, there's nothing around for miles except desert wasteland and some abandoned mines further south into Bureau of Land Management territory. Anyway, I wasn't really worried because there aren't any large predators in Joshua Tree National Park besides coyotes, and even then they're quite skittish. Plus, I had my knife on me just in case anything happened. It wouldn't do much against a mountain lion or bear, but it was better than nothing. As soon as I finished using the restroom, though, things started getting strange. The first thing that happened was while I was washing my hands at the sink inside the outhouse building itself. There are 3 sinks next to each other, mounted onto a wall opposite from where you enter and exit through a door. While I was scrubbing my hands with soap under warm water, which felt great after being asleep, something banged hard on those sinks right behind me, like hard enough that they shook slightly afterwards too. The second thing that happened was when I walked out of the outhouse and looked up at the sky. It was a clear night with no clouds, so you could see all the stars very clearly. As soon as I stepped outside, though, this bright white light appeared in front of me about 50 feet away, maybe less, hovering just above eye level. It wasn't moving or anything. It just stayed there for like 5 seconds before disappearing again. The third thing that happened was when I got back to my car. As soon as I opened the door and sat down, something banged on the roof of my car so hard it shook. I immediately locked the doors and started my car. But as soon as I did that, something banged on the driver's side window. It was so loud it made me jump out of my seat. At this point I was extremely frightened. My girlfriend was still asleep in the passenger seat and hadn't woken up yet, thank goodness. I didn't know what to do because whatever just happened wasn't normal at all. Then suddenly everything went quiet again, like dead silent. No more bleating from off in the distance or anything else either. Just silence. After a few minutes of sitting there waiting for something else to happen, I decided to leave as quickly as possible before things got worse. As soon as we left, though, that same bright white light appeared again behind us in our rearview mirror, only this time it stayed with us until we were well outside the limits of Joshua Tree National Park. It didn't follow us back home, thankfully, but that was certainly one unforgettable camping experience. In the summer of 2002, I experienced an event that I will never forget. My family and I were on vacation, visiting the Joshua Tree National Park in Southern California. We had been exploring the park by car for about an hour when we decided to stop at one of the many scenic turnouts along the road. This particular turnout had a small parking area and was dotted with large boulders. We exited our vehicle and climbed onto one of these boulders to get a better view of the landscape. As I stood there, taking in the scenery, I noticed something moving near some bushes to my right. Initially, I assumed it was an animal, but as I continued to observe, I realized that it was too large to be any creature native to this region. When the figure fully emerged from the bushes, I was stunned to realize what it was. A Bigfoot. It was about 7 feet tall, with a muscular build and long arms that hung down past its knees. Its body was covered in dark brown hair, except for its face, which bore an almost human-like appearance. I attempted to alert my parents, who were still in the car, but they could not hear me over the loud radio. So I stood there, frozen on the rock, watching this creature pace back and forth behind the bushes, seemingly oblivious to my presence. After several minutes, my father finally exited the car and asked me what he should be looking at. As soon as he spoke, the Bigfoot seemed to hear him, and without warning, It began running directly towards us. My father quickly retreated to the car, shouting at my brother and sister to do the same. I, however, remained rooted to the spot, transfixed by the sight of this creature charging towards me, its arms flailing wildly. It was only when the creature was about 20 feet away that I snapped out of my stupor. Realizing the imminent danger, I jumped off the rock and sprinted back to our car. I glanced back just in time to see the Bigfoot leap onto another boulder, the one we had been standing on earlier. It paused briefly, turning to look directly at us, before jumping down and disappearing into the nearby trees. My father wasted no time in starting the car and driving us out of Joshua Tree National Park. We did not look back and have not returned since. Now, whenever someone suggests camping or hiking in that area, my response is always a firm no way. I have resided in Joshua Tree for approximately 3 years now. As an enthusiastic hiker and backpacker, I often find myself exploring the hills of Joshua Tree National Park. One day, during one of my hikes, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned mine shaft. Given that it was late in the afternoon and I had ample time, I decided to explore it. Upon entering the mine shaft, I was greeted by a long tunnel that extended straight into the mountain. Smaller tunnels branched off from the main one every few feet. Intrigued, I ventured down one of these smaller tunnels and noticed something peculiar protruding from behind some rocks at the end of the tunnel. At first glance, it appeared to be a human leg bone. However, upon closer inspection, I realized it was more akin to an arm bone, as it had 3 joints instead of the typical 2 found in leg bones. My attention was then drawn to the white rocks that were piled around the area where this bone was located. Upon further examination, I discovered another bone, significantly larger than the first, buried under these white rocks. This led me to believe that someone had intentionally placed the rocks there. My imagination began to run wild, and I couldn't help but wonder if they were concealing something substantial beneath those rocks. Unable to resist my curiosity, I began to move the rocks away from whatever was buried beneath them. After removing several layers of rock, dirt, and sand, I uncovered what appeared to be part of a large rib cage. It seemed as though only half or perhaps less remained intact, as most pieces were broken or missing altogether. I didn't find any skull fragments, although I did discover several teeth scattered around. I couldn't determine whether they belonged to humans or animals, as the desert is home to various types of canines, including coyotes, bobcats, and mountain lions. However, this brings me back to my original question. What kind of animal has 3 joints in its arms? I am a seasoned hiker and have spent many years exploring Joshua Tree National Park. On this particular day, I was hiking alone on the California Riding and Hiking Trail near Keys View Road, approximately half a mile from where it intersects with the trailhead of La Quinta Cove. It was around 4:30 in the afternoon when I noticed something moving rapidly ahead of me on the trail. At first glance, it appeared to be a man running, but as it approached, it became clear that this was no human. The creature sprinted past me with such speed that the gust of wind it created knocked my hat off. I watched as the creature continued down the trail until it vanished into some nearby brush. It had long arms and legs covered in what appeared to be hair or fur. Its face bore more resemblance to an ape than a human, yet its body shape was akin to a tall, thin man clad in dark clothing. I was in disbelief at what I had just witnessed. This creature bore no resemblance to any animal native to this area, nor did it look like any known primate species. After gathering my wits, I decided to follow the path taken by this creature. There were no other trails nearby, so if there was an unknown animal residing here, perhaps there were others too. The sun was setting behind me as I walked along the California Riding and Hiking Trail, trying to remain as quiet as possible while keeping an eye out for any signs of movement or sounds emanating from the dense underbrush that lined both sides of this narrow dirt road. Suddenly, I heard something crashing through the trees, followed by loud grunting noises akin to those made by gorillas when they are agitated. Then, silence, save for the merry chirping of crickets, seemingly oblivious to the events that had just transpired. My heart pounded in my chest. for whatever had made those sounds must be close enough for me to hear them clearly over the cacophony of insects buzzing around us. Just then, another loud grunt echoed through the forest, followed immediately by a series of loud thumps, reminiscent of someone beating on hollow logs with large sticks. Then, once again, silence, save for the merry chirping of crickets. I continued my slow walk down the trail, trying to remain as quiet as possible while keeping an eye out for any signs of movement or sounds emanating from the dense underbrush that lined both sides of this narrow dirt road. After about 15 minutes, I reached a small clearing. There was another creature standing near some rocks, staring directly at me. It looked almost identical to the one I had seen earlier, but this time it wasn't running past me. Instead, it stood there, motionless, as if frozen in place, watching my every move. We stared at each other for several seconds before it suddenly turned and ran off into the woods, disappearing quickly among the trees until all traces of it were gone. I was in disbelief at what had just transpired. 2 sightings within less than an hour. What were these creatures doing here? And why hadn't they been seen before now, considering the number of people who hike along the California riding and hiking trail every day? While hiking in Joshua Tree National Park, I ascended to the peak of a hill and settled on a rock at the summit. From this vantage point, I overlooked an area dotted with Joshua trees. As dusk fell, the fading light allowed me to see for miles around me. After a period of about 10 minutes, I noticed a flying object approaching from my left side, which was the northern direction. Initially, due to its substantial size, I mistook it for a small airplane. However, the absence of any engine noise soon dispelled that notion. As the creature neared my location, approximately 200 yards away, it abruptly veered to its right, which was my left, and began to circle above me. It was at this juncture that I truly comprehended the enormity of the creature. Its wingspan was an impressive 15 to 20 feet across. It maintained its circular flight pattern above me for another minute or two, before it eventually disappeared into the distance. The entire encounter lasted no more than 5 minutes, but the suspense of the situation made it feel significantly longer. It was a challenge to articulate the events of those few moments. All I can say is that a creature, bearing a striking resemblance to a featherless pterodactyl, flew alarmingly close to my location. It was a clear night, devoid of moonlight. I had just arrived at the campground in Joshua Tree National Park in my van and decided to take a stroll. As I ambled down the road, I noticed shadows moving on either side of me, as if unseen companions were walking alongside me. The peculiar thing about these shadows was that they lacked any discernible source of light or body. They were merely black silhouettes contrasting against the desert floor. I halted and surveyed my surroundings, but could not spot anyone else in the vicinity. The darkness was profound, so it was plausible that someone could have been concealed behind one of the numerous boulders strewn across this area. However, when I directed my flashlight towards the locations where these shadowy figures seemed to appear, there was nothing to be found. As I resumed my walk back towards the camp, these shadows persisted in appearing on both sides of me, only to vanish entirely once I reached my van. The following day, while hiking through some washes near the Barker Dam trailhead, located within Joshua Tree National Park, a similar phenomenon occurred. Instead of observing shadowy figures moving alongside me as before, what appeared to be small animals darted from one side to the other without making a sound. These animals also manifested as solid black shapes, blending seamlessly into their surroundings, making them nearly impossible to spot unless one was paying close attention. Again, whenever I shone my flashlight in their direction, nothing would be revealed other than the rocks and plants typical of this region during daylight hours. After returning home later that evening, having spent several days camping in Joshua Tree National Park, not far from where these peculiar events transpired, everything felt normal again. I was able to sleep soundly without any disturbances. However, the following night, while lying in bed, something strange occurred that left me feeling uneasy once more. I had just switched off my bedroom light and was about to drift off to sleep when suddenly a dark shadow materialized on one of the walls. It resembled a person standing there, except it lacked any distinct features, being entirely black from head to toe. Initially, I considered the possibility that this could have been an optical illusion due to my fatigue, but then I remembered that there was nothing else in my room capable of casting such a large silhouette against that specific wall. This shadowy figure remained motionless for several minutes before gradually fading away as if evaporating into thin air. Afterwards, everything returned to normal again, with no further incidents since then. Although these experiences were certainly unsettling at times, they never made me feel threatened or frightened. Instead, they left me feeling curious and intrigued about what might be happening within Joshua Tree National Park, especially considering the numerous reports of paranormal activity throughout the region. I had embarked on a camping trip in Joshua Tree National Park and had just settled in at Campground. The time was approximately 9:30 in the evening, and I decided to venture out for a stroll down the road from my campsite. The campground was nestled amidst the desert, with mountains looming in the distance. The moon was in its full glory that night, casting enough light to illuminate my path. As I ambled along the road leading away from my campsite, a movement in the bushes near one of the campsites caught my attention. Initially, I assumed it to be a coyote or a similar small creature, given its swift and low-to-the-ground movement. However, upon closer observation, I realized that this creature was standing upright, much like a human, albeit slightly hunched over. It bore a striking resemblance to an ape walking on two legs, but it was significantly larger than any primate I had ever seen. Its body was cloaked in thick fur or hair that hung off its arms and legs, almost like dreadlocks reaching almost to its feet. The moment this creature noticed me observing it from across the street, we both froze, locked in a silent stare-off. Suddenly, without making a sound, it turned around and darted back into the trees behind a camper's vehicle parked nearby. It disappeared completely from sight within a matter of seconds. I was at a loss for what to do next after witnessing such an extraordinary event. The idea of chasing after this creature seemed futile given its speed and size. So, still feeling quite shaken, I decided to return to my campsite and call it a night. Sleep, however, eluded me. My mind was consumed by the image of the creature I had seen. After hours of tossing and turning, I finally succumbed to a fitful sleep, plagued by nightmares of the creature chasing me through the desert, howling like a wild animal. When morning dawned, I was still rattled by the previous night's encounter. I hastily packed up my belongings and left Campground at the earliest opportunity, without so much as a backward glance. This is a true story that happened to me in 2018. I was on vacation with my family, and we were visiting Joshua Tree National Park. We had been driving around the park for hours, admiring the beautiful scenery, when we decided to take a break and have lunch. We found a pleasant spot near some rocks where we could sit down and eat our sandwiches. After eating, I began exploring the area while my parents relaxed on a nearby bench. I walked over to one of the large boulders and climbed up onto it to get a better view of the surrounding landscape. As I stood there admiring the desert below, something caught my eye off in the distance. It appeared to be some kind of shimmering light or energy field hovering above an old tree stump about 50 yards away from where I was standing. The strange thing was that this phenomenon seemed to be moving back and forth as if it were alive. Curiosity got the best of me, so I carefully made my way down from the rock and headed towards whatever it was that had caught my attention. As soon as I reached within 20 feet or so of this anomaly, it suddenly vanished. One moment it was there right before my eyes. The next second, it was gone. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Was this some kind of hallucination? Had too much sun exposure caused me to see things? After spending several minutes trying to make sense out of what occurred, I eventually shrugged off this bizarre incident as nothing more than a fatigue-induced delusion brought on by being outside in triple-digit temperatures for most of the day. However, after returning home from our trip later that week, something else began happening, which has left me questioning whether or not what took place at Joshua Tree National Park might have actually been real. Every night since coming back from California, With the exception of a few nights here and there whenever I go to bed, I now find myself waking up around 3 a.m. I don't know why, but this particular time seems to be when these episodes occur. At first I thought I was just having nightmares or night terrors. However, upon further reflection, I realize that what I am experiencing isn't typical sleep disorder symptoms at all. During these episodes, I feel as if I am being pulled out of my body and transported into another dimension where everything is dark, except for some kind of glowing light source off in the distance. The next thing I remember seeing are these strange portals opening up before me. They look like swirling vortexes made entirely out of energy which emit bright flashes whenever they open wide enough for something to pass through them. There's also this weird humming sound accompanying each flash, similar to a high-pitched frequency only audible during brief moments when the doors fully expand. It feels like there's an invisible force pulling me towards whatever lies beyond those doorways. The sensation reminds me of being caught in a strong undertow while swimming in ocean waves, except instead of water, it's pure energy trying to drag me under the surface of reality itself. Sometimes I glimpse fleeting images within these gateways, such as people walking down streets in cities I've never been before, or animals running across fields I have no idea exist outside my own imagination. Other times I see nothing more than empty voids stretching on forever without end, until eventually I wake back up in bed again feeling completely disoriented and confused about what just happened. I've tried telling a few close friends and family members what I'm going through right now, but most think I'm either making things up or suffering from a mental illness and need professional help as soon as possible. That said though, one person who does believe me is my grandmother, my mother's mother. She has always been very spiritual and believes that certain individuals possess unique gifts, allowing them access to other realms and dimensions not normally accessible by average human beings. My grandmother claims she herself had several experiences throughout her life involving astral projection and lucid dreaming, which she says are closely related phenomena known to ancient mystics and shamans since the dawn of humanity itself. Anyway, I just wanted to share this story with others who might have had similar experiences or know someone else who has. I'm still trying to figure out what's happening to me and why all of a sudden I'm being transported into these otherworldly realms every night around 3 a.m. If anyone has any insights or suggestions about how to better cope with this situation, I would greatly appreciate hearing from you. My name is Chris, and I reside in Southern California. This peculiar incident occurred approximately a year ago. However, it has been persistently lingering in my mind, especially after reading similar. The event took place around October or November. I am a passionate outdoorsman and frequently go camping with my friends. On this particular occasion, we planned a trip to Joshua Tree National Park for rock climbing, hiking, and general exploration. We arrived late on the first night, so we simply set up our camp and retired for the night. The following day, after indulging in some rock climbing, we decided to embark on a hike through one of the canyons near our campsite. As we ventured deeper into the canyon, we began to notice some peculiarities. Firstly, there was a complete absence of wildlife. Not even birds were seen flying overhead. This was strange, considering the abundance of birds we had observed earlier in the day during our climbing session. Secondly, as we delved further into the canyon, we noticed odd shapes protruding from behind rocks. They resembled someone crouching down, attempting to remain unseen by us. Thirdly, every so often we would hear what sounded like whispers emanating from various directions around us. As soon as I heard these whispers, an instinctive feeling told me that whatever was whispering did not want us there. Feeling unnerved by the strange occurrences, I suggested we head back to our campsite, which was not far away. Just as we were about to leave, one of my friends exclaimed, "What's that?" pointing towards another part of the canyon. We turned to see three figures darting away from us at an incredible speed. Their movement was so swift and smooth that it seemed as though they were floating across the ground rather than running. They vanished behind some boulders, only to reappear again, scaling a sheer cliff face. Once they reached the top, They sprinted along its edge until they were completely out of sight. Neither my friends nor I could believe what we had just witnessed. We unanimously agreed to leave the canyon and return to our camp. Upon reaching the camp, the eerie feeling of being watched dissipated, and everything returned to normal. I am unsure of what those figures were, but it was evident that they did not want us in their canyon. Whatever they were, they certainly made their presence known. I was on a camping trip with my family in Joshua Tree National Park. After retiring for the night, I found myself awake around 2 in the morning. Glancing out of the window of our camper, I noticed a large triangular craft hovering above us. It was approximately 50 to 100 feet off the ground, completely silent, and had lights at each corner. In addition to the large craft, there were 2 smaller triangular crafts flying around it. Their movements were playful, almost as if they were engaged in a game. They would approach the larger craft, then dart away at high speeds, only to return within seconds. The larger craft remained relatively stationary, moving only slightly from time to time. It seemed as though it was scanning the area beneath it. The smaller crafts would approach so closely that their details were clearly visible, despite the lack of any external light source. The only illumination came from what seemed to be a propulsion system underneath them, emitting a faint blue glow. This spectacle continued for several minutes. Then, without warning, all 3 crafts accelerated into the sky at an astonishing speed. They left no trace of their presence except for the memory etched into my mind. I remained rooted to the spot, staring at the empty space where they had been until the sun rose. Only then was I able to fall asleep again. It was 2:30 in the morning on a Saturday night. I had just departed from my girlfriend's house and was on my way home. The journey from her house to mine is approximately a 15-minute drive, primarily through country roads dotted with a few houses here and there. I took a turn onto the road that leads to my neighborhood, which is still very much situated in the countryside. This stretch of road is only illuminated by 2 streetlights, one at each end where it intersects with another main road. About halfway down this stretch of road, roughly a quarter of a mile, I noticed something standing by the roadside under one of these streetlights. As I approached, it began to cross the street towards me. Initially, I assumed it might be a person in need of assistance, or perhaps an animal crossing the road, so I reduced my speed. However, as soon as it stepped into the beam of my headlights, all such thoughts evaporated from my mind. This creature stood approximately 7 feet tall, and bore a striking resemblance to the popular depictions of Bigfoot, except for its color. This creature was almost entirely white. Its body was covered in hair, including its face, which seemed to possess more human-like features than those of an ape. Its eyes were large and black, reflecting light back at me when caught in my headlights. They appeared intelligent, though not threatening in any way, perhaps just curious. As soon as our eyes met, everything happened in a flash. It froze in its tracks right in front of me, causing me to slam on the brakes and sending everything on the seat next to me flying. It then quickly turned around and darted back into the woods beside the road. My heart pounded in my chest like never before, for I had never seen anything remotely similar up close, let alone something straight out of a legend. My car skidded to a halt within inches of where the creature had been standing just moments earlier. I sat there stunned, trying to process what had just transpired. I suddenly realized how dark it had become since the creature had blocked out the light from the street lamp. I quickly scanned the area for any sign of it, but it was nowhere to be seen. I was too frightened to step out of the car and investigate, so I just sat there until my heart rate returned to normal. Then, I drove home as quickly as possible. For your information, we are not far from Joshua Park National Park. I've heard rumors that a group of these creatures inhabit the area. What do you think? My wife and I had embarked on a camping trip in Joshua Tree National Park, California. We had just finished setting up our tent and campsite at Bell Campground, which is located near Indian Cove. It was around 8:30 in the evening when we decided to take a walk down the road to look for wildlife. We strolled about half a mile down the road until it curved around some rocks. At this point, We could no longer see any lights from other campsites or vehicles. The only light came from the moon, which was almost full that night. As we continued our walk, my wife pointed out something moving on top of one of the large boulders next to us. She suggested it might be an owl, because she saw wings flapping as if it were taking off into flight. I turned my headlamp on and shined it towards where she was pointing, but saw nothing. I assumed whatever it was must have flown away already. A few minutes later, while still walking along the same path, I noticed what looked like two glowing eyes staring back at me from behind another rock formation not too far ahead of us. They seemed much higher than they should have been if they belonged to a coyote or rabbit, which made me suspicious. I stopped walking and asked my wife if she saw them too, but by then they had disappeared. Not wanting her to panic, I suggested that maybe there's someone else out here with their own flashlight who is also looking for animals at night, although this seemed unlikely. We continued walking cautiously, trying to catch any movement in our peripheral vision, since we couldn't rely solely on our flashlights due to their limited range. After several more minutes passed without incident, we finally reached a clearing where we could sit down and rest for a while before heading back towards camp. While sitting there talking quietly amongst ourselves, I suddenly heard what sounded like footsteps coming from behind us near some bushes. I turned around and shined my headlamp in that direction but saw nothing, so I assumed it was just an animal. However, the footsteps continued to get closer until they were right next to us. It sounded like someone walking on two legs wearing boots or shoes because of how heavy each step seemed. I asked my wife if she heard them too, and she said yes, so we both stood up quickly and started shining our lights all around us, trying to figure out what was going on. We couldn't see anything at first, but then suddenly a large dark shape flew past us from behind, which startled both of us enough to make me drop my flashlight onto the ground, where it broke apart into several pieces. The only light left now came from my wife's flashlight, which wasn't very bright since its bulb had burned out earlier that day while we were setting up camp. As we frantically tried putting everything back together again, another dark shape flew by overhead this time, making a loud flapping sound as it passed above us. We could feel the wind coming off its wings, as well as hear some kind of high-pitched screeching noise before it disappeared into the night sky. My wife began crying hysterically while begging me to leave immediately, but I told her not yet because we still needed to find our way back through the darkness without any working flashlights. Fortunately, after fumbling with mine for a while longer, I finally managed to get one battery reinserted correctly, so at least now we had some light even though it wasn't much. We decided that instead of heading straight back towards camp along the same path we took getting here, maybe there might be another route nearby leading away from whatever those things were flying around here tonight. After searching for about 10 minutes or so using our dim lights combined with moonlight filtering down through gaps between rocks above us, we eventually found a narrow trail leading up into a small canyon. It seemed like the best option available to us at this point, so we carefully climbed up and over some boulders until we reached a more level area where we could walk side by side without tripping or falling. As we continued along, I suddenly heard what sounded like footsteps coming from behind us again, but this time they were much closer than before. It was as if someone or something had been following us ever since leaving our original location back down in the clearing. It was the summer of 2019, and I had just completed my first year at college. One evening, around 10 p.m., I decided to take a drive through Joshua Tree National Park. I had never visited the park before, so it was thrilling to observe all the peculiar desert plants and rock formations that are unique to this place. After driving for approximately an hour or two, the park is quite large, I found a spot where I could pull off the road and camp for the night. I set up my tent and retired to bed around midnight. The outside was pitch black, with only the stars overhead providing any light. There was no moonlight whatsoever. As soon as I closed my eyes, something caught my attention. 3 bright lights moving across the sky from left to right. Initially, they appeared to be airplanes because they were flying in formation, but then one of them abruptly shot straight up into space, while another one veered off at an angle towards the Earth's horizon. The third light continued on its original course until it vanished behind some mountains several miles away. My heart began to race when this occurred because whatever these things were, they certainly weren't planes or helicopters. They moved far too quickly and made no sound whatsoever. Not even any engine noise that you would expect from military aircraft. After watching those lights disappear over the mountainside, everything seemed quiet again until another light appeared directly above me. This time, however, it wasn't moving at all. It was just hovering silently in place high up above where only stars should be visible. Then, without any warning, it suddenly dropped down closer towards the ground level before stopping once more, still making absolutely no noise. This new object looked different from the previous ones too. Instead of being a solid white color throughout its entire body structure, like the typical unidentified flying objects depicted in movies, this thing had what appeared to be a metallic silver exterior skin with a single red light located near its center. At this point, I was absolutely terrified and didn't know what to do. I wanted to run away, but my body felt frozen in place. It was as if something had me trapped inside that tent with whatever these things were. After several minutes of staring up into the sky, trying desperately to make sense of all this craziness happening around me, the silver, unidentified flying object suddenly vanished just as quickly as it appeared, leaving nothing behind except for darkness once again. At first I thought maybe I had been hallucinating or dreaming the entire experience because it seemed so surreal compared to everything else I had ever witnessed before. But then, I remembered how clear-headed and sober I felt during the encounter. Plus, there's no way I could have imagined seeing those lights earlier either, since they happened while I was wide awake, driving through the park. Whatever I saw that night definitely wasn't from Earth, though. It moved too fast to be any kind of conventional aircraft we currently have the technology to build today. At least that is publicly known about. And if it was not man-made, then it must have been of extraterrestrial origin instead. I am a 22-year-old woman. My boyfriend and I were camping, situated in the Sabine River bottom area. We were comfortably seated around our campfire when we heard a rustling sound emanating from the woods behind us. It seemed as though it was approximately 20 yards away from our campsite and was gradually getting closer. We both rose and walked towards the tree where we had hung our food bag. We did not have any bear bags or similar items. The rustling sound momentarily ceased as we neared the tree, but resumed once we retreated back towards the fire. The noise persisted for several minutes before it abruptly stopped. My boyfriend decided to investigate the source of the sound while I remained by the fire in case the creature returned. He came back about 10 minutes later, reporting that he had not encountered anything unusual. He suggested that it might have been a deer or another animal passing through. He had barely sat down next to me when we heard another loud rustling sound, this time directly behind us. My boyfriend sprang up once more, this time armed with his flashlight, and ventured into the darkness, leaving me alone by the fire. This time, however, I did not wait patiently for his return. Instead, I hastily gathered all our belongings, including our tent, which was not fully set up due to the dwindling daylight. I managed to pack everything into the trunk of my car in less than 5 minutes. I then locked all the doors, leaving one window slightly ajar to allow fresh air in during the night. I climbed into the passenger seat and anxiously awaited the arrival of dawn, when the first light of day broke, revealing the beautiful scenery surrounding our campsite. There was no sign of any wild animals having been in the vicinity the previous night. So what had it been? Has anyone ever experienced anything similar? That's all for now. Thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss out on future national park frights. See you next time.